there needs to be a little bit of everything and a little bit of nothing. And that was a concept I struggled with for a long time. But actually, one of the best lessons I got was when I was doing an ensemble class, and the music teacher at one point, I was supposed to do a solo, and he turned the music upside down. He said, now you're going to play without knowing what you're playing. I wish I had recorded that, days without cell phones. If I'm playing a groove, you've got to be thinking about the groove. You've got to be having the chord progression. And if it's a specific groove, you really want to play it properly. I can do 4 cover sets with a singer I used to work with at Monte Casino without a single sheet of music in front of me. But if I'm using music, my brain's on a different side. So it's reading, it's reading, it's reading. You take that book away from me and you now want me to play, it's gone. It's a totally different muscle in my head somewhere. So I guess the honest answer is you practice so that you don't think and that you just play the music, And in playing the music, you're listening, you're reacting, you're interacting, but you're also being respectful. And I think there are some bass players that can't wait for the solo, and if the solo doesn't come quickly enough, they'll make the solo happen. And you know what? Musicians like that. It's cool to have a little bit of flash in your back pocket to pull out, but always remember, bass, by its very nature, doesn't require it to be the most amazing thing you've ever heard. Sometimes it just requires you to be solid. My name is Jason, Jason Green. I've been called worse, but that's what my parents called me. And yeah, I've been a session musician and a teacher for 23 years now. I graduated from the Pretoria Tech in 1995. I remember being one of 3 bass players there, only electric. An upright bass at that stage was an alien invention. Everyone wanted one. If you had one, you could work till you die, but you just couldn't find them in South Africa unless you were in the orchestra. So we only did electric. I studied with Mark Doobie there. I taught at a few places. I taught at the National School of the Arts for like 7 years. I started a separate college called COPA. I was one of the first lecturers there, and we ran that for 8 or 9 years. And then I taught at Academy of Sound Engineering. And what I learned at all 3 of those places is there's good students and there's bad students and everything. I'm sure that there's bad lawyers that couldn't get themselves out of a traffic fine, just as well as there's good lawyers that you pay a lot of money to. And the same with musicians. But the real big thing with music that I still think of today is everyone thinks what we do is easy, and everyone wants to do it, but they're not willing to. So you go to a gig, and there's always going to be usually a really drunk guy that wants to fall over on stage and just take over, because in their mind, we're not working. We're entertainment. Come on, who wouldn't want to do that? All the girls are looking at you. There's drinks flowing, but it's work. Like every job, you've got to stay current. So, for example, the South African music scene at the moment is very fluid. A lot of the regular gigs, I used to have regular stuff at some of the casinos, those are gone. So now you've got to start thinking of other things to do. Things that I recommend bass players do is play more than one style. Okay, so with all due respect to everyone doing it, it's very difficult to be a heavy metal specialist and feed your family. It's great to play it, and I mean, my roots before I studied jazz, Pretoria Tech, were all Metallica, Megadeth, and Slayer, and I still listen to them at least once a week. But beyond that, you've got to be versatile, or you're not going to be hired. And in South Africa, do yourself a favor and learn the indigenous styles too. Learn the Mklanga bass lines, playing it with a pick on flat wounds. Learn, the Zulu styles, the octave styles, as well as learning everything else. Because if you can play both, you've just made yourself more employable. Learn to play keyboard bass. I think every musician owes it to himself to learn to play keyboard, because you've got everything spelled out in front of you, and more importantly, there's no patterns. Bass is all pattern based. You learn a major scale, that pattern can go there, and that's two-edged sword. You learn the pattern, that's great. You've passed your grade 1 exam. But now what do you do with it? And breaking away from that and playing music is, to me, the lifelong search of being a musician. If you're going to be a working musician, 3 things. Be versatile, have the right gear, develop your ear. Those are the most important things. You're not hired necessarily just for your looks, because let's be honest, ladies, who's the bass player in Coldplay? Exactly, A lot of times you go to a session, you go to a gig, and they say, here is a chord progression, play something cool. And the more versatile you are, the better your ear is, the more you've spent time listening to things in your head and finding it on the neck, the more you're able to translate that. And that's your style. Once you've started developing your ear, you can fit into most situations. But the point is also, when I get a gig like that and I've got time to prepare, I don't just go, okay, here's my sound. That's not going to work for Simply the Best. Here's a song I'm learning for a corporate, American Boy by Estelle. Now, it's a pretty simple octave bass line. If you don't mind, I can play it for you. So it goes. Now, that could just be played. There's time and place for everything, and I don't think a lot of people have invested time in their art. So if we look at this bass line, if we're talking about the intricacies of a groove and how you can sit quickly in a band, it's not just those are the correct notes, but you need to, for me, and I'll demonstrate a bit of this later on, is the groove comes from note length more than anything else. You know, and I feel a lot of bass players don't spend that extra bit of time going short, long, short, you know. It's not just, I mean, if you put it to a groove, you'll hear a massive difference. So, as a working bass player, be it a barnyard show, a big musical, a cover gig at the Keg, you owe it to yourself and to the people you're working for to not just know the notes, not just have the right bass, but use your ear. That comes back to that. To go, what makes this style different from that style? How does this song groove? One of the more interesting songs to play is Are You Gonna Go My Way? If you're doing a cover band. Because at guitar solo, the chords are E, D, and A, but the bass player yeah, and if you see him live, he embellishes it even more. He very rarely plays the root notes. Yeah, some of my all-time favorite bass players to learn anything by Motown. Yeah, Reach Out, I'll Be There. Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. Which is big hit. Ain't No Mountain High Enough, which is they bring out every now and then. I heard it through the grapevine. James Jamerson. Yeah, just fearless, playing what he wanted. Using scale tones, using a lot of jazz technique. A lot of what he would do is things like. Of course, he'd go for the P-bass sound. But all he did was he would take a jazz solo approach of 2 semitones in and lead it. Yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind. But, you know, if someone says to you, play a Motown feel, you must have that in your head. If you want to play an R&B, a Duck Dunn feel, then you'd rather do the sixth. That would be more of a Duck Dunn stack sound. If you want to change it to Motown. You know, just by changing a few of your note attacks and a few techniques, you've changed it to that. Okay, so my main effect that I use is a Zoom B3. I've also got a radial bass OD that I use for my upright, and I also pair it with this. The reason I've gone for this is that it's almost like a real pedal. In other words, you can turn the knobs on the fly and it'll change it like as if you were using pedals. 2 reasons for that. When you set up your sound in your room, it often sounds amazing. Then you get to a venue and the bass is too loud, treble's too loud, mid-range is gone, so you're not cutting through. I like the fact that I don't have to menu dive. You can also download a lot of things. Now, a lot of people go, but you know, you lose something in the warmth. There's a very good possibility you do. I haven't found it yet. You know, if you know your gear well enough, you can get for this. Now, I've used this live on TV shows with The Voice and with Dancing with the Stars. Used it in the pit for Evita and for Saturday Night Fever. used it on countless sessions where I just literally go from this into the board. And what I need from it is silence. So when I'm not using effect, it's gone. I spent too many years like, is it this cable, is it that cable? And yeah, a lot of people go, oh, zoom, zoom. You know, Victor Wooten uses it. And then they go, oh no, that must be good then. It's in your ears. You can make anything sound good. So I prefer this simply because it's got everything I need. I can load effects. I've learned how to use it. It's got a great looper. But it's also quiet when I need it to be. So I've played every variation of Warwick, Music Man, Fender. I've owned Fender. I've had about 3 or 4 different Music Man brands, about 6 Warwicks. And again, you know what? Good basses are like good cars. Someone's going to tell you an Audi is better than a Merc, is better than a BM. Once you're spending a 500,000, you're getting a good car, but you're getting the good car that you want. And I find with basses, after years of trying it, I've discovered that I like a jazz bass sound. To me, that sits best in the mix, but it also has a little bit more versatility than a straight P. Having said that, quite often if you go to a session, the producer will hand you a P bass. And here's the interesting thing about a P bass. It's horrible on its own. Man, I hate the sound on its own. But nothing sits in a certain mix like a P bass. You know what I mean? So if you're a working musician, I would experiment with all the Fender variants. And maybe the Fender sub-variants. So get yourself a good P bass, get yourself a good J bass, a 5-string version of those if you can find one with a good B string, a Music Man type bass. So I've now been playing the basses I've had now for the last year and a half, and that's long for me. Usually I would change my bass every year or so because you get bored. Gas is a real thing. But I've been using this SX, my so-called O bass, because people think, oh, it's an SX. It's one of the top of the line range. It was actually made to compete with the Sire range, which is very, very good. But no one was going to pay the price for it. I'll also use an Ibanez Grooveline 5-string, which is also a single coil, but it's also 2 singles, but it's actually two side-by-side humbuckers for the same reason. I have one of the new Court, they call it the BF4 Fretless. It's a fretless hollow body with a piezo pickup and a magnetic. So you can get kind of a Gary Willis-y magnetic sound, but you can also then go for a double bass tone, which is great for traveling if you want an upright sound. Yeah, I use a Warwick amp. I have for at least 3 years now. It's a dual channel. Take it to a lot of gigs because I can use my upright in one and electric in the other, or I can use one bass and have 2 different sounds. I do use DR strings. I get them from Marshall, and why I like these is, unlike normal, these are called pure blues. They're like a nickel steel hybrid. But what they do on all their strings that I really like is they actually compress wound them. So they round wound and then they apparently pinch them, which makes the what should we call it, the winding a bit smoother. So especially their high beams that used to be used by Marcus Miller and the lowriders, they're great bright steel strings, but if you've played a lot of the other brands, the steel strings are very rough and they eat your frets a lot. With DR, you're getting away with a lot of a more smoother feel. So especially if you've got a bright sound, you know, it's a lot less than some strings. Plus, you're getting better fret wear, which is, you know, quite an important thing, especially if you have nickel frets on your bass. One of my first major influences was Victor Masonda. I remember seeing him in Braamfontein. Must have been, I just started playing bass. It must have been 1990. Sure, that's a long time ago. He was playing with a band called Friends First and doing the most ridiculous stuff. Yeah, I can still remember he was playing a red bass. I don't know what it was. I was, 12 years old, but I can still remember that night. I mean, it really depends on the type of music. I enjoy Isochronous' bass player. I think he calls himself Amma Franks now. I enjoy Carlo Mombelli. I have a lot of his albums from the 90s, and for someone that's different, he's actually made it work for him. There's a lot of, I remember first hearing Concord and Kabinde on I think it was a Mtunzi Number gospel album. I really enjoy his playing. I enjoy players that, for example, Joe from the Narrow. Now Joe doesn't claim to be, he really doesn't claim that he's a great bass player, but he's very interesting. He's a very good bass player in my opinion. But what he does is he doesn't play bass like I would. And maybe that's why I enjoy it, because I might be a bit more of a traditional bass player, whereas he'll play something totally a counter melody or an interesting bass line or something. And that's what always grabs my ear. You know, there are a lot of great African players. I enjoy Carlo Eustace playing. I think he's got a tone and a sound that's uniquely his. I'm a big fan of Earl Breezy. You know, I've played a lot of those Lyra songs in other bands, and you know, when I saw him play that stuff live, the way he interpreted things, plus his keyboard bass playing, is very cool. Yeah. So, and I mean, I also, on another side of that, if I can say, I've taught a lot of guys, and you'll find that when you teach, you get asked questions that are hard to explain. You know, like G major scale. Now, what must I do with it? Now, a good teacher would go, you do this with it. A bad teacher will go, yeah. There's a million and one ways to skin that cat. But if you have good, interested bass students, they will ask you questions. And what I did a lot at, when I was still at Copa, is we had a thing called LPW every Friday, live playing workshop. And all the bass players would learn the same song. But by the time they got to third year and the fourth year, I'd purposefully try and leave the songs a bit more vague. Like the first year, I'd write out the bass line for them. Second year, I'd do the same, but maybe with a few add your own things. By third and fourth year, I wanted them to show me something. So I'd leave gaps and specifically ask them to come up with your own fill, come up with your own groove, come up with your own ending here. Yeah, smooth operator, I teach them the first bit of that on. And then I wanted them to do something else on D minor. Yeah, and that always brought out interesting results. You saw some really, really cool things, and you saw some really bad things. But even in the bad things, you'd hear, okay, well, that didn't work. At least I know that much. And I think we were talking about it earlier. I think where I'm at the moment is, when I was younger, it was all about mechanical perfection. Must play to a click. And that's good, but the more we listen to Jameson and Jacko even, and a lot of times Victor Wooten, when he's jamming, he's making a few glitches, but so what? That's the music, yeah? So now I'm more interested in the feel and the groove than just did it work with the metronome? Because if it did, yeah. Having said that, can I just take a side note? Almost everything these days is required with some form of metronomic playing. So if you're going to be a session musician, make sure you can play with the click. I know that I've just said sometimes it doesn't have to be. That's good. But there are other times when it really, really does. You know, even something like theatre, like Evita, we had a lot of conducted bits. So we had Louis Zernheimer as a conductor. So he's watching the actors for certain things. Other songs, he's putting on a click, and you're playing to that. So you need to develop both skills, and that's one of the toughest things about playing in a show band, is splitting your eyeballs. Because this one's watching the music, that one's watching the conductor. And so you have to be able to develop that skill. Plus, you have to be able to play with the click. You must have a good sound, you've got to show up on time, and 3 months into the run, they're not caring if you're bored. The actors on stage aren't bored. Every night, they have to be right on that cue, and they expect to hear that soundbite. And if you're like, you're not going to make it, I'm sorry. You know, those are just things that are required. First thing I'll do is just take a G bass line with the same drum groove, and just do a couple of different grooves and show how note lengths and gaps create a groove. So if you start with the obvious one, bass drum groove, short note, longer, eight. Again, depends on what the hi-hat's doing, and then you can go for the long shorts. I find that if you mute your notes, you can get busier. So, rocker press here, tower of power. Because the notes more of a jack idea, change your sound. James Jameson. Again, all different ideas on one chord, but just changing note lengths and changing slight fills, changing pickups inspires a different groove.